Okay, in this video we're going to talk about the basics of coloring inside of Gaea. So if you want to color your terrain, you're going to first need to know what it is, the information that you're dealing with, what the nodes do, and how you can get them to stack together in order to get a pretty cool result. So what we're going to be dealing with here is starting off with the core basics and moving on to a specific case usage where we'll show an example on an actual terrain. So starting with the basics, we have just a simple mountain here and a simple gradient. If I take this gradient and we look at it, I'm going to take that and I'm going to plug it into a CLUTer node. A CLUTer node is color lookup table. And really all this is it takes information that is value information. In this particular case, it's being delivered as height, and it converts it from one gradient to a new set of colors, whatever that may be. So some other examples in other software would be in Photoshop. Here I have a height map. If I go to Image Adjustments, Gradient Map, this tool allows me to apply gradients to the height information. So where it was white, it was red. Where it was like light gray, going to a yellow, and then a darker gray, green, and so on and so forth. And we can use these to basically remap from one color to another color set and get some interesting results. Now in this particular case, this would just convert into what is essentially height information, since that's what that is. It's a height map. It says, you know, this is the tallest point and this is the lowest point. And that means that at the lowest point it would be one color and the highest point would be a different color. And that could be useful in some certain situations, but ultimately we need to go a little bit further than that. Another example of this type of methodology could be applied, say, inside of Maya. Here I've got an example here where I've got a V ramp going through, and I've got height information. Let's just reconnect this as is. I've got the height information, which I'm taking and I'm plugging into this existing gradient, and it's basically remapping it based on that same essential principle. And I can go ahead and add other colors should I desire. And, you know, mix them around, and I can remap the same way. So this general idea of converting one set of data into another color gradient applies across a lot of different platforms. So this is essentially all that's happening here. We're just converting that information. So if I go ahead and use this, I can simply click on a color. I can change it. Click on this one, change it. And if I want to add a color in between, I just simply click and a new one will be created. And we can go ahead and change that. We'll go ahead and maybe I'll add a yellow. And if I don't want the yellow, I can grab that yellow and I can grab it and just press delete and get rid of it. I can also reverse the input so it goes the opposite direction. And you can do things like change the input noise or color noise to break up that overall information. And there's a few other settings that you can play with on your own in order to generate these gradients. And of course, if I change this right now and change from linear to a radial, and produce that, you can see it's then again re-representing itself based on that. Let's just adjust the altitude of the light here so we can see this a little bit more clearly. And so it's just translating that information. So each time I change the gradient, the helix, again it's basing it on the gradient that's been put through. So a fairly straightforward idea. Now what we can also apply to this is that this also has another input, and this input is the visualization. So if I were to go ahead and plug this in for visualization, I'm going to now be taking this information instead of this information in order to view it. And so now we have one gradient which is driving the color, and the other is driving the actual displacement, which is fairly useful. And this is really the core element that we need to understand with regards to texturing this, is because we have a multitude of other ways of gaining grayscale information, so black to white with gray values in between, to drive the color. And this comes in here with things like angle, curvature, height, slope. So let's look at this. If I take this and I were to plug it in, I'm getting this result. But what if I were to go ahead and do something like slope? And the way that the slope works is that based on this, the angle of the surface, it will generate a value. So if I go ahead and plug this in, start reading slope information, and I use that to plug into the input, well, now it's basing it on that. So if I just right click, pin this, and let's start changing slope values, we can see how that can read. And if we go into the CLUTer node and change some of these colors, so I'll change the peaks, say, into a grayish color, and this I'll give a slightly bluish tinge, and this I'll go with white. You can see how that can translate into essentially a snow-covered region. Maybe I can darken this. Let's go there. So we can pick out this information to create a snowy region. So you have, of course, the height information, which we normally have, but it gives you a few additional controls. You have overall angle, so not just the slope, but the actual angle. We have things like curvature, which again, can feed into this in a different way. And we get all the little grooves and stuff like that, and we can combine these things together. So the idea is that we're taking other data and we're using it to drive this color remapping node to get this different variation. So the next thing that we need to be aware of is the idea of stacking color. We want to be able to stack this color. So I'm just going to unpin this before I delete it. We'll go here with, let's grab CLUTer and another CLUTer and a mixer. I'll put those in there. And let's get some really simple shapes. I'll just grab two gradients. And one I will set to a radial gradient, because it's really simple to see the difference between them. And we'll plug these guys in. Combine them there. And these CLUTer nodes, we're going to change them to some basic colors. So I'm going to go with a reddish there and a, try and stay within the same value range. When you change colors, you can't necessarily go with the same value because it ends up looking brighter than the other one. So go and we'll dim that out and try and get it within the same tonal range, so that we know that it's not value that's altering this. We'll go with a green, let's say here. I have to actually select it to actually change its color. Allow us to pick a new color, but it's not actually doing anything. We'll go with maybe something like that. Try and keep it in that tonal range. A little bit brighter. Like that. And so now I've got red and green, and with some color variation, right? So these gradients are essentially driving some basic color variation here. And what I end up with is something that's kind of muddy. And I want want this one to be my visualization, so we'll just go with that. So I'm getting kind of a muddy result. This mixer works the same as your combine node inside of regular Gaea, where you're combining different kinds of height map information. In this case, we're dealing with RGB data. We're dealing with red, green, and blue. And it has all the same basic options. So the blend option is basically one or the other, and you can go 50% in between, which is what we're dealing with. And we can do things with like add. And if I go with add, of course, red plus green is going to give us yellow. And when we deal with these some purple and off green colors, we're getting sort of like maybe a beige color here. And they're just adding together. And that may be something that you want to do. But in many cases, probably what you want to do is you just want to have, I want, my green stuff here and my red stuff over here, and that's the way that I want to deal with it. So this mixer will allow you to do that with the use of the mask node. So if I go ahead, I'm just going to take my circular gradient and plug that in. And then result is now I have a green versus a red region. And it may not be as strong as I might like, so I'm going to adjust that. And I'm going to go with a contrast node. And we're going to plug that in, and plug that into there. And that's going to give us more control. And what I'm getting here is a value which is beyond the range. And I can go ahead and try and fix that with trying to do like an auto level, but it's not really correcting the issue. What I have found is that I can take this information and I can go with, say, a sigmoid, and that will change that information there. And I can use that. Let's go ahead, right click pin so that we can do that, and then I can play with this so we can see the mask update. And so now you can get some nice edge blending and can control the strength of that overall edge from the input that you have there. And you can use other methods of altering that as well, should you desire. So this is the basic concept of color stacking. So if I want to take this a little bit further, I'm just going to hold down Control and just move this over. Let's go and add something else. So I'll bring in another contrast node because I'm probably going to need it. I'm going to need another mixer over here. We're going to just unpin that. And we're going to need another CLUTer node for color information. And let's just grab, let's say, a mountain node to generate something even different, so a completely different shape. So we'll go ahead and grab that mountain, we'll plug it into the input of the CLUTer node, and let's grab, say, a nice pretty blue, and go to like some interesting sky colors. There we go. How pretty. And we'll go ahead and plug in our mixer node, and we'll plug in our other color into that same mixer. There we go. And we're getting these weird greens and purples because it's not blending that way that we want. We want to put this over top. And so again, I'm going to run this through that contrast node and then plug that into my mixing. So I'm going to go ahead and pin that and change to sigmoid, and I can change that blending. So again, you can use some other different nodes to adjust your masking, to sort of remap them. There's a whole bunch of different levels, bias gain, blurs, etc., gamma adjustments, etc., that you can use to manipulate this in different ways. So the contrast is not the only way that you have to deal with this. There's other ways that you can get them to mix. But the idea is how to stack it. So you get a series of colors, and then you mix them with a mask, and you make sure that you're working in blend mode. Otherwise it's just going to add. So it's not going to put over top, it's just going to add the values together, which you may not want. So the blend mode allows you this to have, you know, one color sitting over top of another just by stacking them in a row using that mask information, and then controlling that mask information through other means. So now for a practical usage case. Typically speaking, we have a whole bunch of information that we can pull from when we do things like erosion tools. We'll end up with things like flow lines and wear and that kind of business. We also have these flow maps, soil maps, surface velocity. We have these selectors which deal with angle and slope. So a lot of these things we can use in order to generate additional data which we apply as color and mask information in order to get this across. So let's look at an example that I've come up with, which is fairly straightforward and simple. So here we have a simple example of sort of a desert mountain idea. We've got the light coming through, we've got different blending of colors from the different sorts of rock types, sand, and all that kind of business. And really it's just starting off with a basic mountain. We're going ahead and displacing it, and I've got post-process auto levels going through that. And then we run an erosion on it, and then another micro erosion to get small erosion areas. Nothing terribly elaborate. So it's just a few nodes, and we get a fairly decent look. The next information that we're dealing with is that we have our different color ranges and some additional sort of flow input. So coming off an erosion node, we have information such as height, which is going off into here. But then we have things like wear, deposit, and flow, which I'm also then mixing with another flow map. So I've got this flow map plus that flow map to add together. And so the information coming off of these things and these contrast nodes for our wear and deposits are being used to drive both visually color blends. So I've got, you know, I think this is the height information, which is controlling these two, and the wear is controlling the blend between them. And so I get height information. Basically it's lighter at the top and a different color at the bottom. Again, same thing here to get that kind of gravity idea, the feeling of gravity. And then when I blend them with the wear node, I get this nice blend. I'm then going through another piece of color information, which is coming off of the deposits. And the deposits, I'm getting a lighter colored sand in the center of it into a little bit darker range. So tonally, they're not a huge difference. And hue-wise are also not a huge difference, but there's enough variation that we can see it. So it's just subtle. And I'm then using that information yet again right here to control the blending of that. So I've taken the deposition information and I've run it through contrast to then control its blend. So this is that stacking idea. So we're going from this then to this. And so I have those colors stacked in, and I've got that idea of it transitioning from these slopes down into this lighter color. So it feels more like these darker things are blending through, and I don't know, maybe they get bleached in the sun or something like that over time. Now, with the idea of coming off the micro erosion and doing a flow map from that to add to the original flow map, which is coming off of here, when we blend those two things together, I get a combination of the micro lines and the stronger lines that go through here, so that these are a little bit more subtle than, say, the main lines, but they're there, they're present. And I'm using this to then drive another piece of color information. So not a huge variation, but there's certainly something there. If I can get this to get in closer, not so much. You can kind of see it there, the variation. And so now, using that information, we're using it not just to drive color, but also to drive our next stack. So we're going from this to this. And we get these kind of ranges of flow. Now, one thing to be aware of here is that in the effort of doing my combine, it's dealing with 32-bit data. And because of this, it's dealing with values that can go above the value of 1. It's not just locked to that value of 0 to 1. And so in my post-process, because it's going above that value of 1, we're getting areas that are turning white. They're not maintaining or respecting the colors that I've chosen. It's going above those values because it's adding more of it, more of that range. And that could be something that maybe you want to happen. That's totally cool. But if it's not the result that you want to know why these things are glowing, you need to make sure that the information you're using to do the mixing with, because you won't see it happen here, you're going to see it in the mixer, you have to control that. So I'm going to go into the post-process and I'm going to tell it to auto level. And that gives that a maximum range. Now I can decide if that's actually what I want. This is like, the strongest region because of all that overlap, and maybe this is the area that has the most flow, and maybe I'm happy with that. So you have to decide if that end result is actually what you want. You can play with the levels, how much of one versus the other. We'll go ahead and, like when I adjust this and move more towards one range, you notice that all of these other ones get a little bit brighter, and this kind of maintains itself. So you can decide how you want to blend that. But that gives me that flow through there, which maintains its color and it's not getting overly bright. So if I go ahead and pin this and then play with some of those settings, look in those regions and see if I like the results more that way or less that way, and that's up to me to decide. So this is, again, a very basic use case where you're essentially stacking from one set to another using different pieces of information, things like your velocity, your surfacer, your soil map, your flow map, the information from the erosion, other map data that it uses there, slope information, curvature information, so on and so forth. So much to choose from. So before I end this video, like I said, we're not going to go into the biome in this particular video, but we will use the set maps just quickly. Just drag one in here. And the reason why we're going to go through this, the set maps is they're actually a preset, a series of presets that exist. And we have an input and a visualization. So we'll use both the same in this particular case. Just like the CLUTer node, and let's unpin this one. That's why it's not showing us. And what they are essentially gradient maps. And you can just select through the index to find the different variations that you like. And of course, you can use other input data to play with these gradients as well. And they'll create some pretty cool different results based on what you have plugged in. So that's the basics of doing your color in here, and of course you can output these things just as you would the regular height map information. The core principles of how you work with this is really what's important. So hopefully you learned something new, and I'll see you in the next video.